Welcome everyone, Costin here on Serious Gaming with an interview I did for Kingdom Come Deliverance with Warhorse Studios. Just to give you an idea of what I did, I contacted them on Twitter asking if I could send them a bunch of questions via email. They said yes, so I did that and I got an answer several weeks ago. I've been sitting on this for several weeks. There's been other things that have occupied my time, but I finally want to cover this because I'm quite excited of the game. Disclaimer, I have supported this game on Kickstarter when it was originally put there, so I'm very interested in it succeeding and I really hope it's a good game. Just a point, if it's not a good game, I'll rip them through shreds myself. People who have been subscribed to this channel know that I don't hold back my criticism of a developer if they fuck it up, especially a developer that makes a lot of promises. Though, I'm hopeful, and what I've played of the alpha is actually really good, so we'll see, we'll see. I have a good opinion of the game so far, though the alpha being the alpha has problems, which, you'd expect. Performance mostly, stability, those kind of issues, but the sword combat, one of the main features of the game, is really good. Anyway, on to the questions. First question, and I won't read everything that I asked and exactly what they said. I'll post this in a forum thread on their own forums, but I'll basically talk about the gist of it, of the question, and the answers, and my opinion on what they said, basically. First question was about how long the game has been in development, basically, and how large the team was when they first pitched the game on Kickstarter and how large it has gotten. They didn't tell me how large their team has gotten since their Kickstarter campaign, though they did tell me that there's about 80 people working on the game right now, and that development of the game started in 2011, so they've been working on this for a while now, though with far fewer people with far fewer people in the past than right now. So just bear that in mind. Obviously, they got a lot more people after the Kickstarter campaign, and as they got more and more funding, so that's a good idea. It started as an idea between two people in a pub in Prague, and now it's grown to a development team of over 80 people. So that's good. Second question was about their budget and, how that's worked out for them. Because, well, suffice to say, just to give you an idea here, because they didn't answer this question, I asked them about the overall budget, if they got more private investment after the Kickstarter campaign than what they originally were promised, and so on and so forth. And they didn't really answer this. They gave me a generic answer, so I want to talk about their situation in terms of funding. Originally they got, and this is based on articles that I've read on the internet, interviews that they've conducted with other people. From what I understand, and this is something I understood from the point when they put it on Kickstarter, they got some original funding to make a demo for the game, and they were going to take that demo, and they did take that demo to major game publishers to get the funding needed to actually make the game. The problem is the publishers were not willing to actually fund the game at the time. This was, by the way, before Xbox One, PS4 had come out, and a lot of publishers were cautious at the time and weren't willing to risk it, basically. So what they did is that they went to the original investor, the guy who had given them the money to make a demo for the game, their initial funding. They presented their surveys, which showed that people had an interest in them. All that data that they had showed publishers and had been unable to convince them, they showed that to the investor, showed that there was an interest. In order to convince him to fund the game, they said they would have a Kickstarter campaign, and the original goal, which was £300,000, would cover about 10% of the funding of the overall game. And obviously the Kickstarter campaign was a huge success. I was curious about the overall funding, how big of a budget this is. Just to give you an idea, I think that the overall budget would probably be, it's at the very least $7 million, because, £3 million, about $5 million is what they were promised, and they also have $2.5 million from crowdfunding, so, $7.5 million at the very least. So, you know, possibly more than at 8 million, 9 million, 10 million, something like that. Around that mark. That's not actually too bad. Just to give you an idea, something like The Witcher 2 was made on an overall budget, and this includes marketing, of $8 million, and that was a superb game. Even when on day one, this, you know, with all the fixes, sure, it's gotten better, all the patches, all the fixes, though it wasn't really buggy on release. There were just some problems here and there, but not overall a buggy game. It was a great game on day one, so it's certainly doable. You know, I was just curious to see how that was, but they didn't give me an answer. And you know, there are certain questions where I didn't expect an actual answer, and this was one of them. So not unhappy about that. Anyway, third question: in what time of the year is the game set in, and how long of a period of time will it span? Weeks, months, years? You know, when does it start? Where will it end? Will there be a period in time between each act? You know, things like that. And basically they told me it starts in the early summer of 1403 in Bohemia, in the middle of the Holy Roman Empire, one of the most powerful states at the time, or polities, as I guess you could call it. I think that's the word, polities, right? At the time, 7 years I think it is before the Hussite Wars, you know, just before the Hussite Wars, that's what they said. But it's 7 years before the Hussite Wars. A lot of things were happening in this period of time. By the way, it's actually a very interesting period of history. The story will take place over several weeks in terms of a period. There won't be any seasonal changes. There will be weather changes, but they do plan to jump slightly in time over the other acts. The game is split into various acts: Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. They're gonna release Act 1 next year. At least that's how it was. It was supposed to be originally this year, like late this year, but they delayed it, you know. I never really expected it to actually come out this year, by the way. You know, that whole thing with Q4 2015, that was more a fantasy than anything else. And, you know, I don't think anyone's disappointed by that. But anyway, next year we're gonna get Act 1, then Act 2, then Act 3. That's how it's gonna go. And one thing that was mentioned here, that we might even find ourselves in the Hussite Wars. That would be interesting, though I guess they'd have to make firearms and cannons. Like, the Hussite Wars were probably some of the first wars in Europe where gunpowder weapons, personal weapons, not cannons, were actually used. Cannons had been used, you know, for years before this, and I'm curious, you know, one thing that I'd be curious about, and I didn't ask them, you know, there's certain things I didn't ask them, is whether or not cannons would actually show up in the game, you know, because they were actually used in this period of time, as far as I know. Anyway, but the Hussite Wars were, I believe, the first major war in Europe using firearms, personal firearms. Don't think of muskets like in later periods of time. No, these were really primitive, far more inaccurate, far worse, by the way, than what came later. But it's still very effective. The Hussite Wars, well, a lot of knights were slaughtered there. And I think the Hussite Wars would actually be a very interesting period. I'm curious to, you know, we don't know, like, they didn't tell me here. It's like we might find ourselves in the Hussite Wars. That would actually be very interesting. Building up to that and then being thrust in the Hussite Wars. But I'm not sure if an act or 2 acts to a game, let's say Act 2 places you in the Hussite Wars, I'm not sure that would be enough to actually cover the Hussite Wars properly. Anyway, question number 4 is, what weapons will be available for players to use in Act 1? And another thing I asked is whether or not they make weapons only for NPCs, like halberds, because they've talked in the past about the difficulty of making certain weapons available, you know, and I was just curious to know if it was too difficult if they'd put them on NPCs. And the answer I got is basically every interesting weapon of the era. That includes short and long swords, sabers, maces, axes, shields, and even spears and halberds. Should have asked them about the crossbow. Should have asked them about crossbows. And, you know, obviously we will have bow, that's even in the alpha right now, but I'm curious about crossbows. You know, personally crossbow, someone who prefers a crossbow myself, it's easier to use, obviously, you know, as it would make more sense than a bow. A bow requires a lot of training, a lot of strength. A crossbow is easier to use, not so easy to load, but to shoot it, yeah, that's fairly easy. Question number 5, and this is kind of pet peeve of mine with a lot of fantasy games: weapon sheaths. Not just sword sheaths, but axe belt loops. Like, you wouldn't carry an axe like you would a fucking sword. You'd have a belt loop for that axe, and you would have it turned differently than a sword. Like in a lot of games, like say Witcher 3, Dragon Age, you have people carrying axes as they do swords, and that's just nonsensical. That's not how you'd carry an axe. You'd carry it very differently. And the answer is yes, that they are working on weapon sheaths. Good, you know, good. It really speaks volumes about AAA development when you have so many games that don't have this, and it's very simple to do, by the way. Like, if a game like Mountain Blade can have weapon sheaths, and that has an infinitely smaller budget than something like Dragon Age and Witcher 3, I see no reason why a bigger game with a far bigger budget shouldn't have them. So, good on Warhorse for working on this. Question number 6. Horse fighting. There's been, like, horse fighting was an advertised feature on their Kickstarter page, just to make a point there. And I believe it was even in the reveal trailer. I'm fairly certain it was in the reveal trailer. But then they said that it might be too difficult to implement, at least in Act 1. But, well, the answer I got is that fighting on horseback was the plan from the beginning, quite ambitious. It is an important part of medieval combat and an interesting one, and very different from what people usually imagine. They're not sure how much they're able to finish and how much they'll have to save for future acts in Kingdom Come Deliverance. So they're not certain at this point how much of it they'll have. Witcher 3 does have force combat, just to give you an example there, but it's not particularly complex. I don't think there's any really good example, and this I include Mountain Blade, which is known for its horse combat, that has really authentic horse combat, really, that does it very well. And I think Warhorse is trying to do it justice, but it's quite difficult to do it in terms of melee. Anyway, question number 7. In terms of actual history, there are incredible amounts of things in this period. Just to give you a couple examples, this is the period of time when the Teutonic Knights were reaching their zenith as an organization, where they were even threatening to destroy all of or conquer all of Lithuania and Poland, where the Turks were on the march, where the Mongol hordes existed. Yes, and there was Genghis Khan 2.0 in the form of Tamerlane marching against the Ottomans, and actually that saved Europe for a number of years because the Ottomans were absolutely hammered by the Timurids. So a bunch of things happened. Then a couple of years before the game, the Battle of Nicopolis, a crucial battle in European history, and actually crucial battle in my own country's history, in Romania, because, just a point here, one of the main characters in the game is Sigismund II of Hungary, who's actually buried in modern-day Romania, who's buried in medieval Hungary, but now that's part of Romania. And he had an alliance with Mircea the Elder, or Mircea the Old, who was the ruler of Wallachia. So that's very interesting. So there's a lot of interesting things going on, and, you know, something for general culture. The whole legend of Dracula, that exists, you know, because it was slander against Vlad the Impaler. But the reason the word Dracula, how was that created? Well, Vlad's father actually was a member of the Order of the Dragon, which meant that he was called Dracul in Romania. In our tongue, that's, you know, that's just how they called it. That's probably how it was translated back then. Keep in mind, these people weren't speaking English, so, you know, dragon would probably be referred very differently. Anyway, he was called Dracul because of that, and Vlad the Impaler was also called Dracul, and in fact his entire house was called House Draculești, or Draculeș House, noble house, that is. And who created the Order of the Dragon, you might ask? This is the point I'm getting at here. The Order of the Dragon was created by Sigismund II of Hungary, a main character in this game, in Kingdom Come Deliverance. So a lot of events, a lot of things going on in this period of time, and I was just asking if some of these things could be referenced. I'm not sure if they got the point. Basically, I was asking if they, would reference them, like if you would have some conversations, maybe you sit down in a tavern and then, there's this old war veteran that fought in Nicopolis, or, there's certain people with war experience, or merchants talking about how the Ottomans are getting wrecked by the Timurids, all that stuff. So a lot of things going on in history. The answer is basically, I don't think they got the question. It's like, and nor did they really give me a good answer here. Is like, what they said is that they're focusing on this particular period, this particular struggle for the Bohemian crown. By the way, history. Sigismund would eventually win, even if he would lose. Basically, Sigismund is trying to claim the crown of Bohemia. He was king of Hungary. He wanted the crown of Bohemia, and he wanted to become Holy Roman Emperor. He did become Holy Roman Emperor, but he was frustrated in his efforts by what happened in the game. Anyway, in terms of castle sieges, the next question: will they be set battles that cannot be impacted? Basically, battles that can't be changed in any way by our actions, or will there be things to change the course of the battle, like, say, infiltrating the castle before the attack, assassination missions, spying missions, all that stuff? And the answer is, these battles are going to be very rare, something that they've stressed in a number of other interviews, by the way, but that there will be many options before and while fighting, but that you will never lead an army or become king. You can't change history. You tell your story within the historically correct story, that is. Okay, so we will probably have options in terms of changing the battle or having some impacts there. Obviously, this is an RPG. There will be choices and consequences. Battles, and here I probably should have said large-scale battles, because that's also a feature. Now, the way I understood that is that large-scale battles would be separate. At least that's how I understood. Maybe I was wrong. Anyway, in terms of the large-scale battles, will we fight the entire battle in a single go, or will there be segments of the battle, separate segments? Because a battle wasn't fought in a single full-blown charge between the two sides. It was fought in segments, and periods, right? It could take days, weeks for a single battle to be fought, and basically the answer I got is like, who knows? Yeah, that's a non-answer, basically. What's the scale of these battles, and what's the scale of the battles compared to the actual historical battles in terms of number of soldiers? Basically, they'll try and be as historically accurate as possible, but they'll probably have to trim down the number of soldiers to make room in the engine. Reasonable, I guess. Not unexpected. It would be nice to have a scale, though, like, okay, 10, a tenth of the overall scale, or 100th of the overall scale, or something like that. Just to have an idea of what we're gonna deal with. Another question is, they said that there's no strategic mode where you could command an army, but I wanted to know if this was changed, and it's like, nope, it hasn't changed. Okay. Okay. I did make a note here about, maybe not commanding an entire army, but commanding a group of soldiers, a banner. Yes, that the banner was a military unit, and be able to give commands. Also, just a period before the battle where you'd have the generals sitting on a near a table planning the whole strategy out. That would be, by the way, a great segment to add there. Just my personal thoughts on there. Will we be able to choose who we fight for and where we're fighting for? Like fighting for the Teutonic Knights, or be able to start with either the Poles or Lithuanians, depending on your choice. That's the Battle of Grunwald, and I think that's going to be at least that's what, the marketing material or some of the very early video showed, the Battle of Grunwald. I'm fairly certain that's the Battle of Grunwald. It's like, well, and this is the point where I don't think they got my question, because, or maybe battles are different than what I thought they would be. Maybe they are actually tied in the story. Just keep in mind, Battle of Grunwald actually took place not that far, you know, in terms of time, not that far away from 1403. It was just a couple of years later. So, you know, they could have that as part of the story, especially if they're going to skip several years between acts. So just a point there. But the answer they gave me is, your life is bound by law. You're not a free man, but the servant to a certain nobility who fights back against Sigismund's invasion. But this is the army that ruined your life. Thus your interest here is the same. Basically, you know, that's kind of interesting though, because you'll be fighting for one side. You won't just be able to do whatever the fuck you want. You're stuck on a certain path, which makes sense in a historical context, because as a peasant you weren't allowed to do whatever the fuck you wanted. You're bound by to your lord. You're bound to the land you're born on. You know, so things like that. There were a lot of restrictions for peasants in the Middle Ages. Next question about story choices, micro or macro choices, what kind of choices we would have. When I think of micro choices, I think of something like Alpha Protocol, where you don't really change the story. You have very limited decisions that affect the world, but the vast majority of your decisions affect your relationships with characters. Macro decisions are more like Witcher 2, where you change the world significantly, where you have an effect on kingdoms, or, you know, characters, or large segments of the land, right? Large segments of the world there. So I was curious to know what kind of path that they were going to go down there. Basically both, as far as I'm reading this response, but the choice is reasonable. You know, you can rob a caravan. You'll affect the environment, by the way. Like, there will be, like, your choices are not going to be in a bubble. This is something that they've talked about from the beginning. Your choices are not going to be in a bubble, and they're going to affect various things that happen in the ecosystem, in the economy, to how characters react to you. But just a clear-cut point, you're still Henry, the son of a blacksmith, and you will always stay Henry. You're not the chosen one here, and that's, you know, that's great. You know, I'm so tired of games where you're the fucking chosen one when you're the special guy, really. In terms of a protagonist, are we gonna be playing a blank slate or a set character, or something in between? Something in between, I'd say Mike Fortin from Alpha Protocol, or the BioWare protagonist. That's generally what I think of, something in between. Blank slate is more like Skyrim, Fallout, right? And the answer here is Henry, in terms of his history and his visuals, is set. But it's up to you how you shape his character, right? And you'll have choices in terms of shaping his character. So, kind of set character, though there's some leeway there. You're not going to be playing basically Geralt of Rivia, but you're also not going to be a completely blank slate character. So, more like something in between. It does sound very similar to, say, Mike Fortin, who does have a set past, a set gender, all of that stuff, but you can shape his personality. You do have quite a bit of choices. Alpha Protocol is one of the best RPGs I've ever played, by the way. I'm just using that as a reference here. Anyway, are we going to be on our own? Next question, are we going to be on our own, or will we have companions to help us out? We won't recruit or lead an army. Sometimes in quests we will have companions, but they'll leave after the quest is done. And obviously you'll have help to siege castles, right? So it seems to me that you're gonna be on your own for the most part in the game. Well, okay, fine, reasonable choice. And final question is about crunching, how you know, they handle that. And this is something I asked maybe to draw attention to a problem, a big problem as I see it in terms of game development, is that it's expected that developers will crunch for weeks, months, you know, for long periods of time. They'll be working for very long for very long hours, well, little time off, and that's kind of a problem in the industry because there's very little regulation in terms of that. There's very little in the way of unions in the industry, and you know, I'm not referencing Warhorse here, but there's a lot of publishers that treat their employees like shit. Like, when you're thinking of a publisher, when you're thinking, say, Call of Duty, then what happens with every Call of Duty? And, you know, there's been media outlets that have mentioned this. It's something that's known for people that are interested in digging this up, that publishers hire a lot of people to finish a game, then they lay those people off. You know, their job security is not that great, and, you know, the working hours are not that great either. So, you know, I just, you know, wanted to ask them how they handle it. They said they're fully motivated. You know, it's something that's hardly avoidable in this industry, and that's kind of true. You know, you can't avoid it. The reality is, it's pretty much in this industry standard at this stage, and that's kind of sad as I see it. For a game like Witcher 3, I think they crunched for over a year. That's how bad it is. Crew is fully motivated, and they want to drive the project to an awesome end. And you know, everyone in the studio wants to make this project happen. You know, they're pouring their hearts and soul into making this game happen. You know, that's good, right? So, you know, you have a dedicated team of people that want to make the game of their dreams. And, you know, I think someone, you know, you look at someone like Daniel Vavra, who pitched this idea to his superiors at 2K. He made the Mafia 1, Mafia 2. He was responsible for those games. You know, you see someone that is very dedicated and, you know, has an idea, has his passion, has always wanted to make a game like this. He stated this on several occasions. You know, and it makes me very hopeful because there's so many developers that just don't care. And, you know, Warhorse seems to care. We'll see what comes of it. That's all that there is. Costin here on Serious Gaming signing out. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. And if you like the content that I'm doing, please support me either via PayPal or Patreon.